By 1991, when this film was released, the Soviet Union was on its way out. Japan and the rest of the world no longer felt trapped between two superpowers, at least for a temporary time. However, Japan was feeling even more independent than the rest of the world. While the US was a big power, Japan at that time had become the world's second biggest economy, and it seemed possible it could outpace the United States. Already, the Heisei films were changing due to the times. The feeling in Godzilla Returns is no longer present. Now Japan had to deal with its position in the world ever increasing. Japan had built itself up from the past. It had been bombed out and turned to rubble. But it seemed it was on a line of growth that may just last forever. But the dark past of Japan was not ready to go away, and the fear of what that could mean for the future was ever present. And what better way to explore those themes than a group of time travelers attempting to destroy Japan by releasing 3 little Ghidorahs so they could become one big one, and accidentally making Godzilla bigger. Though, at the same time as all of this, American movies were being exported to Japan and becoming increasingly popular. This film is full of references to many different American films, and there's even a character named Spielberg, in honor of course to Steven Spielberg. So while this film simultaneously places Japan as an incoming world power, it doesn't at all shy away from paying homage to all the films that inspired the director, Kazuki Omori. But it isn't as easy as just saying that this film believed Japan would become a worldwide empire in the future because Japan is the greatest. One thing I love about Biollante that I see carried on in this movie is questioning everything that we have accepted as a society. This movie has a surprisingly nuanced view of the situation. The plot of this film revolves around a group of time travelers who promise they can rid Japan of the threat of Godzilla forever. They take Miki and Terasawa, a writer who will write a book about Godzilla in the future, to an island in the Pacific during World War II. There they teleport a pre-nuclear Godzilla far away, but rather suspiciously 3 golden bat creatures are released before the time machine returns to the present. When they return to the present, Godzilla is gone and Ghidorah is destroying Japan. Japan decides it has no choice but to bring Godzilla back to destroy this new monster. I was initially expecting this to be the entire plot, but it continues. Godzilla has never actually disappeared. Because he was moved from his initial location, he gets hit by the radiation of a Soviet sub, which causes him to become even bigger than before. He defeats Ghidorah, and Emi, the only Japanese time traveler, turns on the other time travelers. Miki is elsewhere during this part. The time travelers had actually come to destroy Japan in the 20th century, to prevent them from becoming a world power in the 23rd century. The time travelers get blown up by Godzilla, but then Godzilla does what he always does. He can't be controlled by Japan, and begins a trail of destruction through the country. Emi goes back to the future to revive Ghidorah. She has to convince the other people of her century that Japan will not make the same mistakes and not end up as an empire in the 23rd century. Anyway, she makes a new cyborg Ghidorah. Ghidorah and Godzilla face off again. Godzilla and Ghidorah both fall into the ocean at the end of the movie, and both are presumed dead. Emi returns to her time and all is well, except that Godzilla opens his eyes, revealing he is still alive and Japan is not yet safe. So that is a lot of movie. So what does it say about Japan's position in the world? Well, it understands that there has been some prosperity made, but ultimately the economic expansion of Japan is leading towards crushing consequences which could lead Japan to destruction. Now, obviously, Japan was never going to buy entire continents as the time travelers say in this movie, but the real-life Japan was growing in wealth. But who really had all the wealth? In this movie, we see a character that exemplifies all the themes here. Mr. Shindo. Shindo was there in Japan's past, is in the present, and is working on the future. He connects the themes of this movie beautifully. Shindo was on the island that Godzilla lived on before he was hit by the bomb. Then, Godzilla was a normal dinosaur. Shindo is the commander of his regiment, and the American forces were arriving on the island shortly. He told his men to prepare for battle, and to do it for the people back home. When the Americans do arrive, it causes Godzilla to emerge from the forest. The Americans continue to fire on him, causing him to unceremoniously kill all the American troops. Major Spielberg watches from the ship and sees this unfold on the shore and decides he won't send any more troops to the island, and leaves the Japanese with the dinosaur. As they say, That island needs scientists, not American military people. Yeah, the delivery of the line was a little clunky, but it does serve to give a nuanced view of the US, making them not only a ruthless destroyer. Anyway, Shindo gains a deep respect for this animal for saving all his men. After the war, Shindo became a very successful businessman and began running one of the largest companies in Japan. He begins to take himself as the one that pulled Japan from the rubble. So we know that the economic boom of Japan, that in this universe Shindo played a part in, is leading to Japan becoming an empire once again, like it was before the conclusion of World War II. Japan is heading back towards its past, but this time through wealth and not just military. The setup is interesting, because while the time traveler's actions in blowing up Japan with Ghidorah is presented as not justifiable, the reasoning is presented to be understandable, and all the characters accept that Japan cannot continue down this same path. So what this movie says at its core is that Japan was wrong for being an empire. It's not saying being an empire was only bad because it led to Japan's destruction, but that the act of being an empire in general was what was wrong. At the end of the day, despite Shindo's general characterization as a respectable gentleman, he is wrong about Japan. I mean, there are some shady aspects of him. For example, he owns a nuclear sub, despite not being associated with the government. Clearly, his company's obsession with power starts with him, and will continue to grow afterwards. But there is one scene. In this wordless scene, Shindo decides to confront Godzilla instead of running away, and in his skyscraper that his company built, he stares down Godzilla. The two share a moment, each remembering the events on the island in 1944. Shindo knows Godzilla will kill him, and he nods ever so slightly as if giving Godzilla permission to. Godzilla cuts the scene off by blasting him with atomic breath. Godzilla appeared to be Japan's savior back on the island, but that was only happenstance. Godzilla did not save the Japanese garrison on purpose, it just turned out that way. When Godzilla returns to Japan, he shows how worthless nationalist thinking is. Because Shindo and his garrison were fighting for the Empire of Japan, Godzilla appeared to be a savior and on their side. They believed that because of how heavily they believed in the Empire. Underneath it all, Shindo seems to have been trying to bring Japan back to where it was before World War II. Godzilla's return signifies that the past, what Japan is built on, and how Shindo built up his company, is actually fragile. A country cannot be built on nationalistic ideology. Japan's economic bubble would collapse at about the time this movie was released, which is extremely interesting when one sees Godzilla destroy everything that Japan had spent decades building. And despite Godzilla's aggressive behavior, we see emotion in his eyes, showing he is alive and complicated. Shindo doesn't only want to break away from the restrictions that the United States put on Japan after the war, but he wants to become his own superpower. I mean, consider one thing. We see Shindo became the most successful businessman in Japan, but at the beginning of the movie, we actually meet someone else from his garrison. This man still works at a small food stand that sits at the foot of the skyscrapers. If even someone that close to Shindo didn't get to share his immense wealth, how much did Japan benefit? It was only a temporary illusion that Japan would become the next great power. Godzilla arrives to shatter it all. Godzilla in this movie becomes more than he had ever been. When Godzilla returns, the characters conclude that Godzilla was always an inevitability due to humanity's actions. As such, Japan never gets rid of him, as long as the past still hangs over the country like a storm. At the end of the day, this movie does wish the best for Japan. Japan is able to fix its mistakes and not go back onto the route of empire, but still build itself up and spread prosperity. I don't know how to fit this in, so I'll just add it here, but there is a scene where Ghidorah flies over Hiroshima. We see the monster fly over the Hiroshima Peace Memorial, where a building that survived the blast still stands to this day. It's an interesting way to connect the two destroyers of Japan, the people from the future and the US, because despite how this movie criticizes Japan for its actions, it still doesn't believe the civilian population deserved to be destroyed for it, and to show how bringing these weapons to life is ultimately not worth it. Anyway, this movie did get Akira Ifukube back for the score. Apparently, he didn't care much for the soundtrack of Biollante. When he voiced this, his daughter told him that he was the composer for Godzilla after all, so he should return. Ifukube agreed, and this movie delivers on the soundtrack. There are new renditions of old themes and new themes that give the movie a massive scale and sense of urgency that makes the film so thrilling. So I enjoy most aspects of this film. A lot of the effects don't hold up as well, but the crew really did work hard and it shows. And there are definitely decisions made, and some things flow clunkily, but at the end of the day, the film offers a surprisingly nuanced and retrospective view of Japan at this time that is priceless. Well, that's all I got for today's video, and as always, thanks for watching.